when you ascend all the way to the C-suite, the most likely way you depart is via termination. And it's because of what you said, CJ, which is like most execs aren't going to quit because they want to make sure that they get severance. And usually exec severance packages they can be very, very lucrative.
Hey everyone, this is Nolan and Kelly's producer, Natalie. Nolan and Kelly are off this week with their families, but up ahead we're sharing a killer episode of Run the Numbers, CJ Gustafson's excellent CFO podcast that aired a few weeks ago. He invited Nolan and Kelly on to talk about the ins and outs of executive departures. A lot of this we haven't covered yet on HR Heretics, so I think you'll really enjoy this deep dive on firing execs, replacing CEOs, and the unexpectedly lucrative world of employee settlements. You know that Nolan and Kelly have seen it all. I do highly recommend subscribing to CJ's show as well. We'll put a link in the show notes. He has a great interview with Jim Cook that's worth bookmarking. Nolan and Kelly will be back next week with a new HR Heretics.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
And we're live. So, welcome to the Run the Numbers podcast. I'm lucky to be joined today with the HR heretics themselves, Nolan and Kelly. What's up, guys?
What's happening?
What's up, CJ?
So, I'm going to come straight from the top ropes on this one. So, forgive me ahead of time, but we got to give the people what they want. And I'm going to give you a bit of context here. I haven't had to do this in my career yet. I'm a first-year CFO, but I figure that if I stay in this startup game long enough, it will inevitably happen. So if I'm a CEO or a CFO, what's the best way to approach exiting a member of my C-suite? What's the first step I should take when I think it's time to make a move?
Yeah. Listen, the first step, hopefully, is that you've been talking with that executive. I mean, that's the ideal, is that the executive knows that it's not smooth sailing. Maybe you've had some disagreements or some feedback chats. I mean, these happen in different ways, but it's usually pretty direct, right? So ideally, that's the first step, is that you're having those conversations and they're just not comfortable. And execs are usually, hopefully, adults at that point, and they lean in. Like, listen, should we have a different type of conversation or not? It's not one of those surprise, you're on a PIP type situations. The second thing I'd say is the first step is for that CEO to talk to the board. Maybe not every board member and tsunami out like wildfire, but usually an early investor or a trusted board member, they're having that conversation as a heads up and getting advice.
Yep. I agree with Kelly. I would also say I have a general rule of thumb, which is to treat others the way that you want to be treated. And so if you are going to terminate an exec and the decision has been made, I think it's really clear after you've been delivering feedback that in the conversation with the exec, you state, look, the decision has been made. We're going to part ways. And then the nuance really begins. But as Kelly said, if you're not communicating feedback, we're having an entirely different conversation.
I want to drill into what you said there, Nolan. You kind of framed it as a decision that was made, and now we can talk about why. Is that an imperative way to frame it up?
I absolutely think so. But to anchor on what Kelly said, you need to first be giving feedback along the way.
Right.
And so as is the case, I don't think executive departures are that much different than regular employee departures.
Okay.
And so when you are terminating somebody, you don't walk into that conversation expecting to come to a different outcome. You're walking to that conversation with a decision being made. And then it's, hey, how do we frame the comms plan? Let's talk about compensation. Let's talk about the transition period. There's a ton of nuance there. But the first step is after we have delivered feedback, we have made a decision, we clearly communicate the decision to that person, and then work through everything else.
There's three kind of points on a continuum, no pun, in my opinion, how this happens in my experience, right? The first one, CJ, is after, again, after the skies haven't been clear and sunny for a little bit. I mean, everyone kind of can see that, feel that. That executive might lean in and say, look, CJ, what's the deal here? Is this not working out? Like, am I going to get fired? Like, they will just lean in and ask the question, which is great. The second is if those two come to a conclusion together, ideally, like this isn't the right thing. Let's focus on the how now, the comms, right? That is the best because it's not as stressful, it's not as time boxed or time bound, and they work together on that plan. And then the third is when that executive just needs a 2x4 over the head, and that is where you see like the quick, like rip and replace, and everyone's frantically going around the comms plan, and that's the worst because it's like no huddle offense at that point is usually more disorganized and very stressful.
Yeah, Molly Graham told us this, Kelly, and I actually, this is my philosophy as well, which is the best way to terminate somebody is for them to quit.
That's correct.
And that means you've been delivering a ton of feedback. They know exactly where they stand, and they could just opt out of the company. I've actually found in most cases, I'd say 80% of the time for me, the employee ends up quitting. And to Kelly's point, that 2x4 is very, very rare and actually shows that somebody lacks complete self-awareness if you are delivering legit feedback along the way.
Can I offer a potential fourth one? And this is from just the outside, I've observed a really hard one, and why I asked, I think, Nolan around, is it a discussion versus a decision? And that's when the company is doing really well, but growth is outstretching talent, and you need to bring in someone more senior. Not necessarily that the person hasn't done a good job. Let's say they've gotten the company $10 million, and they're really proud of that, or 15 or 20, whatever it may be. But you need the next 18 months of growth leader for that position. It's a slightly more nuanced example, but have either of you had to deal with that kind of tricky situation where it's more a result of success than failure?
For sure. I usually with someone like that, and they're great, you want to keep them. You want to retain them and have them stay within the organization. Usually they get layered, right, underneath a new leader. And that's either someone's like, I'm in and I see that opportunity, or sometimes the ego gets in the way, or it's not explained very well and they opt out. Right. But that success, ideally, the world now gets bigger. So it's not that their role gets smaller. It's actually getting bigger. It's just a different structure.
I think that frame is meant to be genuine, Kelly, but I think can sometimes be total bullshit. Somebody once told me first impressions with executives are everything. I think first impressions with humans are everything. And the specific example this person used is we were talking about somebody who had been layered and I was interviewing them for a leadership role on my team. They said, look, this person came in pretty junior and pretty immature and then grew a ton during their tenure here. But our CEO can only remember the first conversation they ever had. And the metaphor he uses, like, it's like you show up to a family reunion and everyone's like, oh, it's little Nolan. And you're like, I'm an adult here. Like, what are we talking about? And so, CJ, I think that the question is, have we been actually delivering feedback and watching this person grow? And do we believe that they can get to the next step? And if so, then like, let's deliver them feedback. Let's get them a coach or advisor. Like, let's help them get there. That's a separate discussion versus you're not going to make it. I've already decided we're going to layer you. That's still a decision conversation. And I think how you handle that nuance, to Kelly's point, will decide if that person stays or leaves.
I wanted to go back to something that you had said, Kelly, around talking about the compensation side of things when you have the conversation with an exec who's departing. How much of that is fully baked once you go to discuss that with the exec, say what the number of months you're going to pay them out, what's going to happen to their stock? Is that already fully decided, or is that part still part of the discussion?
Yeah.
We know they're leaving.
This will be a good topic. No, this is a spicy one, and there is no canned response.
Bring the heat.
Like there's no canned response, right? Like some executives don't trust their freaking CEO, and they're like, I'm not gonna fucking resign because then I resign. I get screwed. I don't get
and you don't get severance.
I don't get any of the stuff. right? I think that is awful. And I think, contracting through and having that discussion without the fear of getting screwed over, like that's where these things happen.
I've been given that advice on 2 occasions by execs, right, wrong, or indifferent. They said, CJ, never quit. You want to get fired. I said, that is morbid. I don't know if I want to get fired and how that feels. But they said, comp-wise, that's the right thing to do.
Well, it's also true that if you end up as an exec, the most likely way you leave the company is by getting fired. So let me just state that.
Say more on that too. That's good.
It's just the reality of when you ascend all the way to the C-suite, the most likely way you depart is via termination. And it's because of what you said, CJ, which is like most execs aren't going to quit because they want to make sure that they get severance. And usually exec severance packages they can be very, very lucrative. So let me just say one thing, which is I have done this twice in my career with 2 different execs. One of my biggest red flags is when an exec pre-negotiates their severance package and they put it into their offer letter.
Okay.
And in both of those cases, those execs were terminated. And so it's a small end count, but for me, one of my bigger red flags is when an exec pre-negotiates severance, because it's like, well, what are we like? The whole goal is for you to be successful here. And then if it's not, like, we all act as good actors, all of us have reputations on the line, and we treat others the way that we want to be treated. But I'll tell you that's one thing I've seen. 2 of 2, end count is small, but when you pre-negotiate severance, never a good look.
I don't agree that everyone's a good actor, though. Like, I want that, right? I'm between us two, Nolan. I'm the Pollyanna. Everyone's going to be good, and like that doesn't always happen. And I will be honest, when I came independent, they did not have this. And Todd said the same thing. Well, why do we? What if you're not performing? We should, And I agree with that, but it's not just about that, right? If you look at what these execs are doing, they're taking a big risk. It is a risk. And
everyone's taking a risk, though, on joining a company. It's like it's agnostic of exec or director or senior IC. Everyone's taking a risk.
It's riskier. Listen, I was a part of GitHub the first, X weeks, CEO, founder out, big upheaval. Like, shit changes.
But it changes if you're an employee. Like, I think execs get put on a pedestal, and I don't agree with it. And a lot of these, like, a lot of companies, here's a dirty secret. Employment litigation at the exec level is out of control. And a lot of times, these execs that are getting terminated are holding the company hostage with some sort of employment suit that they've made up post-termination. And what most companies do is they settle to make it go away. Like, that is absolutely happening, and it happens all the time. And CEOs that are listening to this are probably nodding their head in agreement, because it's crazy, especially the first time that you go through it. But like, I don't agree that execs are like some special breed of person that deserve special treatment outside of everyone else in the company, especially with severance.
I agree they're not some special breed of person. The other piece of it is, if I join a new company, shit hits the fan, like boom, 2 months, like 3-4 months later, I'm out of a job. Like, it arguably takes me longer to find the next right thing than an SDR.
That's true.
That I think is what I was meaning by that risk. Like, of course shit happens.
Yeah.
But it's harder to find it's like a more of a needle in a haystack situation than, again, an SDR. And this shit's happening with individual contributors too, Nolan. Like, people are smart now. Like, the litigation.
But is that not a right? So are you saying that you guys pre-negotiate severance?
No, we don't negotiate it. It's just like, hey, if these things are to be true, not if you get fired. Like, if something happens it's out of your control, we'll help you out for 3 or 6 months while you figure it out.
Okay, so kind of similar to what Netflix did then. So basically, Netflix said, hey, it's top performance, and if not, it's a generous severance package, and everyone gets generally the same severance package. That's kind of what you're saying?
That's correct.
That makes sense.
I'm torn because I see both sides, in the sense that, let's say I'm an SDR, I get fired, I have a lot less savings to fall back on than an exec who's been doing it for 10 years. and can afford to take a break. But at the same time, the surface area for me to have a soft landing at another company is a lot wider, in the sense that there are more SDR roles out there than there are CMO roles at Series C through D companies in the fintech space.
So 2 things. A lot of ICs do get severance, so it's not like they don't get a padding.
Like
And
2
second,
weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks.
I mean, but I would also challenge that execs have money.
Yeah.
Like that's
Isn't it funny that they get
kids
the biggest
eat a lot,
payouts?
CJ.
Yeah,
Kids
they get
is
the
kids.
biggest payouts, but they have the most money. It's like when you get famous and they start comping you for dinner. At least it's what I hear. And it's like, well, I can finally afford this now, and people are giving me free stuff.
Look, I do agree. I think there are execs out there that are like, give me the sun, moon, the stars, and think about all this shit. And it has gotten out of control. I think actually the macro environment has helped like control a lot of that and dumb it down, because it was getting to be pretty crazy.
When you say pretty crazy, and we can keep this off the record if you two want, and you don't need to say what company or position it relates to, but what's the largest golden parachute you've ever seen?
I've seen 12 months before.
Oh, that's not that bad.
Well, if you want to get really spicy, I've seen 24 months when you throw in long-term disability and all this other stuff into the mix,
Yeah.
or short-term disability.
So
right?
if I'm making $300K as an exec, like $600K in cash guaranteed, plus equity vesting?
The equity vesting is something that is not pre-done. So that tends to be a thing, to be honest with you.
A
So
conversation.
it's a conversation. So there's different levers, right? There's equity acceleration situations. There's window exercise timeline extensions. You want to throw garden leave into the mix. There's garden leave to elongate things like vesting or cliffs benefits. All these things are like ingredients of a cake, and each cake is a little. The only thing that I've seen like really is the severance, right? Is the salary. Like everything else tends to kind of, not deviate too far, but it's not pre-done.
They're all different levers, CJ, is the way to think about it.
Yes.
Ultimately in service of the outcome. And so typically the CHRO and the CEO will have a conversation. And I've had this conversation, and it typically goes, from my standpoint, what is the outcome we want? And if the outcome is, I want them gone yesterday, then we think about different levers. If the outcome is, I deeply care about this person, I would really appreciate them to transition the team, then that comes with a different set of levers. And often can include, which Kelli did not include as part of her toolkit, some people stay on as advisors.
Mm-mm.
Yes.
And then you could talk about equity continuing to vest and those sorts of things. But it really comes down to, what does the CEO want as the first principle? And then what levers are available to us? And then conversations with that exec.
Yes. This is why it's very important, if you're an exec, like to be mature about these things, right? And like as much as you can, and work with, not kind of push up against or flare out. I mean, so I think it's important, because these things generally come down to a conversation.
But CJ, you asked a question and I want to answer it directly.
Yeah.
Which is, what's the biggest I've seen?
What's the biggest sticker price?
Yeah. So not personally, but a friend had an exec file a wrongful termination suit, and they settled for $10 million.
That's a big number. How often do you see equity being accelerated upon a termination? Is that pretty rare? Is equity acceleration only reserved, do you think, for acquisitions?
I have rarely seen equity acceleration in exec exits. Single, double triggers, yes. Acquisitions, yes. More commonly, the exercise window is extended, usually 1 to 2 years, which is why I have a very strong opinion on this. I think the 90-day exercise window is shit, and I think that needs to change. And I don't know why it hasn't.
I'll tell you why it hasn't.
I'd love to hear it.
Because that equity is going back into the pool, and execs get the largest slice of equity, and boards don't want dilution. That's why the 90-day PTE still exists today, even after, what was it, Pinterest that went to 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Airbnb went to 10 years.
At Carta, we had your tenure. So like if you were there for 2.5 years, you get 2.5 years for your PTE. But the real reality is, after being in these discussions, boards care deeply about dilution, and specifically with exec equity, which is a huge portion of that pool. Boards want that back in the pool.
So funny, it's just so funny how everything nets out, because I've known so many people over the years that literally are staying for that, and they're not doing much. And so like the value they're creating for these board members is just less than if they could just exercise some of it. Some of it goes back in and give it to someone new. I mean, it's wild.
It does create perverse incentives for sure.
Wild.
I love that you hit on that, because rest and vest is real in the Valley, where people will chill out. In the show Silicon Valley, Big Head is chilling on the roof, and he's just resting, investing. They're grilling out every day and hanging out. Maybe that's like taking it to another extreme, but you do have people that are maybe trying 80%, 70% as hard as they were before, just watching the calendar.
I've seen it personally. From my own view is like, I'm a binary person. I'm like all in or all out. And so that's like never resonated with me, probably for the detriment of my own bank account. But, I will say that tech is a game. Like we're all playing a game, and some people play this game to an expert level. And that is one I give people credit who can just continue to hang around and continue to get paid, even though it's not the best thing for the company, because they're looking out for their own self-interests. And I think that is a failure of the management team, specifically the CEO and the board, when that is happening and they're not doing anything about it.
I agree. I'm more similar to you, Nolan, in the sense that I'm an on and off switch, and it eats at my soul just to kind of chill or not try as hard, because I'm always thinking, well, what could I be doing if I was going 100 miles per hour?
Totally. Life's too short.
I wanted to quickly define a couple things for people listening. So Kelly, you'd use the term garden leave. What is garden leave?
Yeah, so it's basically putting someone on life support, so to speak, right? They're not working, they're not doing anything. They're essentially gone, CJ, except for on the books.
Does it only happen for CFOs? Because I've only seen it at a prior company for a CFO. No?
No way. Absolutely
because
not.
Garden leave is a popular term also in the finance industry within investment banking. Like if you leave one company and go to another, or if you're like a bond trader. I had a friend who was on garden leave for the whole summer, and he was getting paid because they didn't want him to have, I don't know, trade secrets or something.
To go to a competitor.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no, it's essentially another lever in the toolkit to use, right? To keep someone on ice, so to speak.
Okay.
For a certain purpose, whether that's extension of benefits. Again, getting someone over an equity vesting cliff date. But a lot of companies, and I agree with this, right? Like if there's a 6-week severance policy or whatnot, someone's on 3 weeks of garden leave, they don't get the garden leave plus the 6 weeks, right? So it'll kind of eat into that severance.
Okay.
It gets tricky when someone's like, I want 3 months of garden leave and 3 months of severance.
Doubling up.
Which I've seen.
What's a single trigger versus a double trigger clause?
Kelly, you describe this better than me, because candidly, I worked for a couple of CEOs who were absolutely against it. And so when it came up, it was always like, nope, we're not even having this conversation.
Yeah, it's true. A lot of CEOs, you shut it down. And that's why I'm asking you to define it, because I feel like nobody wants to talk about it, but they kind of ask for it, but don't know what it means.
So my understanding, I'll give you my understanding, and then CJ, Kelly, like, please educate me. A double trigger is if the company gets acquired or goes public, and then you are terminated. There's 2 events that happen. A single trigger is full acceleration. Sorry, I should say full acceleration is associated with that. Full acceleration upon the event, typically being an IPO or an M&A.
Yeah. So single is more advantageous than double to an employee.
Yeah. And execs are like, every exec has now been told from their friends to like ask for this. And what I found working with my friends in M&A, they always tell me, Nolan, this shit doesn't matter at all because it all gets renegotiated during the M&A process. So if you're an exec and you feel so awesome that you negotiated your double trigger in, well, it turns out that the potential buyer of that company is going to have a conversation with your CEO and your CFO and say, well, this person has double trigger and we don't like that. And so we're not going to do the deal until you fix it.
For some roles, it gets renegotiated. Yes, that's correct. Not all. So, and I don't know why the hell anyone would give someone a single trigger. It's
I
never
agree
made,
totally.
I've never seen it personally. It
Same.
never made any freaking sense to me. I mean, if you got it, good for you for playing the game, to Nolan's point, but it's just insane to me. The double trigger is interesting because yes, it's via a liquidity event and then having to do with your job, but in the course of an acquisition, it's not just terminated. There's sometimes language that if your role changes in a substantial manner from before, you can trigger that double trigger, which I've never
Kelli,
seen
did you
done.
see it at Looker?
No, I have not seen the role change piece of it.
Well, no, I mean specifically, did you have employees that had double trigger at Looker? And then what
Yes.
happened
I had it.
post-acquisition?
I had a double trigger.
Tell us about it.
Well, I mean, so and then
She was holding out on us, Nolan. This is what
I
this
mean,
is what we were
what are you
looking for.
No,
The definition.
it's so you have this double trigger, and then upon upon the deal going through, it was determined before that my full-time role would go away, along with the CFO, along with the chief legal officer. Very common. And we were on 3-month fixed term contracts, which is basically like we are employed by Google for 3 months to help with transition and then are terminated. Right. I ended up staying for a year with a full-time offer. But that's
did your equity get accelerated?
So on the day the deal closes, because our jobs were deemed to go away, the acceleration went through. Yes.
That's dope.
That's cool. It's like in the movies, how they drew it up.
Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hey everybody, your co-host Nolan here. High performance and great culture should never be at odds. They're better together. With Lattice People Management Platform, companies efficiently run people programs that create enviable cultures where employees want to do their best work. Serving thousands of customers of all sizes globally, Lattice helps everyone work better together. Learn why companies from Slack to the LA Dodgers choose Lattice. Visit lattice.com/HRheretics today. That's Lattice, LATTICE.com. Have you ever had a negative experience hiring an executive? I certainly did at Carta and DoorDash, and that's why I started Continuum, the modern AI-powered executive search firm. Continuum connects executives and senior operators to venture-backed tech companies for fractional and full-time roles. You could post any executive-level role to Continuum's marketplace and search through our database of world-class experienced leaders. Continuum will intelligently surface your opportunity to relevant operators. They'll express interest and show up in your inbox. It's like magic. There's no platform fee or hidden cost. You only pay the person you hire, and you can cancel at any time. If you're thinking about hiring an exec in the middle of a search right now or don't know how to solve a problem, I get it. Scaling is hard. Companies like Athletic Greens, Weights and Biases, Masari, and more than 100 other tech companies have turned to Continuum for help solving their people ops, go-to-market, engineering, and finance challenges. So check out Continuum in the description below. Ping me on LinkedIn if you have any questions, or head to joincontinuum.com.
Kelli, what are the most common positions to get axed? I'm a CFO. I'm guessing that's probably one of them. You
Yeah.
don't need 2 CFOs.
No, that's one of them. Sometimes marketing, sometimes not. Not in the case of Looker. Our marketing team is awesome. And sometimes you negotiate the fixed term, right? Like some people are like, fixed term, like I want a fixed term versus a full-time offer.
Yeah.
Like we did have a lot of those folks, and Google was like, hell no, we need these people. We don't have enough of this position. So it all depends.
Asking for a friend. In your next role, would you counsel people in the C-suite to ask for a double trigger at least, even if they get shot down?
I have a good answer for this. And I really believe that there should be parity amongst executives.
Hmm.
And so instead of asking for double trigger, I would ask if anyone does have double trigger and that there is parity amongst executives.
Fully agree. That's what I said. Listen, coming in here, I'm going to see everyone's stuff anyway. Like, I don't really care what it is. What is it? Are there double triggers?
Exactly.
Are there severance benefit plans? Equity parity, right? With your percent ownership? Like, it's really important.
I think it should be either all of the people in the C-suite have it or no one has it, because otherwise you get into these situations where, say, the CEO and CFO are negotiating for an outcome that's better for their situation than everyone else.
You also have this asymmetry of some people know to ask for it or have had it historically and come in with this like, I'm not going to do it unless we have this as part of my deal. And other people don't know how to ask for it or have never heard of it before. And so they're at this massive disadvantage. And ultimately, these people are on the same team.
Totally.
So I like, my general rule of thumb is assume it ends up on the copy machine at the company and everybody can see it.
Yes.
Can you justify it?
Yeah. It's amazing to me how many C-level executives still, they're just not savvy around things like double triggers, severance benefit plans. What's your percent ownership? How does that connect with the shares outstanding in the company? And like what like it's insane to me how much this is still just kind of an enigma. And it was for me for a long time, and it shouldn't be. So I'm glad we're talking about it.
What about an employment agreement? Would you also counsel everyone going into a C-suite or VP level job to get an employment agreement? Or maybe a better way to phrase that is, what level should you start to actually ask for one at?
Yeah. My view on this has changed. So historically, I used to believe that like, just look at the contract and sign the contract. I am now of the belief that if you are VP and above, it is very wise for you to engage employment legal to have them review the contract. And like we just talked about this asymmetry, legal can help reduce the asymmetry and help you figure out which questions to ask and also point out any yellow or red flags in an offer letter. So I think for me, VP and above, engage an employment lawyer and have them review the contract. It's just a dotting I's, crossing T's thing.
I don't disagree. I personally have never kind of indoctrinated the employment contract. It's more, what's the offer letter, right? Are there appendices, et cetera? That's one thing I've never really formalized, but getting it looked at is always helpful.
Is an employment agreement a noun in the sense that you can have I have an employment agreement? So what you were saying, Nolan, sounds like the verb of like have someone review it. But I hear the term thrown around all the time, like, I'm not as worried, I have an employment agreement. Does that mean, is that the pre-negotiated severance that you were referring to just at the beginning?
It could be pre-negotiated severance. It could be something else. It could be addendums to the offer letter.
Okay.
The most savvy exec I ever negotiated with, we had a 2.5-week process of redlining his offer letter. Now, again, this is somebody we ended up terminating. So I think that says more about him and his process. So I would not use that process. And we were like, by week 2, we were like, is this seriously still going on? Like, what the fuck is happening here?
That sounds ridiculous.
It was crazy. I learned a lot though from that process.
I'm sure you did.
I did. Because I'd never seen anyone do it before. And so, for me, that's where I learned, holy shit, like this guy is bringing, an AK-47 to a knife fight. Yeah. And I actually felt underprepared from where I was sitting. And I think, so there's nuance there, but to answer your question specifically, it's typically an offer letter. And like, that's what we're bartering and discussing. And then there could be addendums, additional clauses, including severance as part of that, negotiated as part of the offer letter, which then brings the holistic employment agreement.
Correct. That's correct. Do you know what always turned me off? And I just have to say it is when these execs come in and say, from the equity perspective, right, that negotiation, it's like, I have to net like 10 million a year, or I have to net, and it's like, oh my God, like You're here to make the fucking company money. You're here to 4x the price, not get you 10 million at this price. Like that
Right.
always turned me off more than pre-negotiated severance.
So to take the others, I'm with you, like also annoyed me. That said, a very large VC firm that anyone who is listening to this conversation definitely knows of actually uses that to get execs across the line. And they tell us, the internal operators, that like, oh, for this role specifically, the way you need to pitch the equity is that in 4 years, it'll be worth at least $30 million. And look, I think all of this stuff is contextual, but I think a lot of those discussions, Kelly, have been coached in by VCs. And it's stupid and toxic and encourages companies to lie about their growth and their valuation as opposed to having honest conversation with people.
Yeah, look, I'm not surprised at that. We talked about the game of tech. Like, we all know, like, of course it happens. And I actually don't really care about scenario modeling. Like, that's fine, right? Like, CJ, if I'm bringing you in and I'm giving you a $10, $15, $20, $25 per share.
I'm the one doing it. I admit, I do it for candidates all the time.
I like that, Nolan. I like seeing the 10, 20, 30 billion. I just don't like when a candidate comes in and says, I won't even fucking talk to you unless you can guarantee me 5 million a year, like starting now at this price. Like,
yeah, that's crazy.
No.
You haven't had any value yet. You gotta show up and
you
do
haven't
your job.
added any fucking value. Like, and the value is I want to be here. I want to build this, love the environment. And I want to be part of the reason that thing is at 30 million.
Right.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah, I want to walk in the door and make NBA money without putting up a shot. That's nuts.
I mean, guaranteed contracts are also in the NBA though, too, CJ, right? So like,
yeah, that is guaranteed money.
And that's, I'm Kelly, I'm totally with you. And CJ, I think you described it perfectly, which is like, they need to add value in order for it to be worth something. Just in general, whenever you experience ego like that, biggest red fucking flag, run away from it. Do not work with that person.
There's just something so presumptuous about it that it's just like very, very tough pill for me to
disconnected from reality.
So this is on a spectrum, right, of presumptuousness, if that's a word. I can't even spell that. That would be a hard one.
Presumptuation.
Yeah, there we go. What I'm worried about is not to go to the level of Nolan's person who went back and forth for 2.5 weeks. But I think that's why people without that self-awareness won't ask for certain clauses or a double trigger, because they're worried that they're going to be perceived as greedy on day one and not be able to overcome that reputation.
But that's why Nolan's advice is spot on, is you frame it in a way that is authentic, is what does your executive team have, if anything?
Look, I think leveraging your network and your friends is always helpful and is what I get used for probably from my friends, like more than anybody. But to acknowledge that, like, that's how much asymmetry exists, is like you have to like know people and call them and ask them for help, which happens. It's crazy that that's what has to happen. And so I think the way to do it is to go back to what I said earlier, which is just to be genuine and just to ask questions about what does everyone else have? I'm asking just to make sure that there's parity and fairness, not to be the person who's trying to extract every cent and every potential clause that would be in my favor. It's just be a human, be a good human. It's not that hard.
Yeah. I mean, I usually say, I don't want to come in here and like find out that I've been treated differently. I just don't want to worry about that shit. We got enough. If I'm going to come in here in this role, we have enough to do. I don't need any of this coming back. I want it just off the table.
I think advice for people listening is to frame it and word it as, what do others have from the lens of parity, and not, can I have this? Can I have that? I think it then puts you on equal footing with your peers and shows that you're trying to play a team game. You're not trying to look like an outlier here.
Totally.
A couple hard ones here. So the first one, how does a board approach firing a CEO? What's the timeline events that usually takes place if you're not working at OpenAI for the process to be done cleanly?
Yeah. I mean, I love your take, Nolan. I don't think it's actually that dissimilar to the exec in terms of like the mechanics and whatnot. It's a bit trickier in terms of like the timing and how long these conversations go on. I mean, they're protecting their investment. So removing the CEO of the company is a risk to that investment. So I don't think it's something that's done lightly. And I've actually never seen it except for like egregious situations.
I've personally never seen it. What I know to be true is that it is an absolute last resort, especially if it's a founder CEO. Given when Benchmark and other VCs removed Travis as Uber's CEO, and I think looking back now with the hindsight of 2020, I'm not sure that was actually the best decision for Uber at the time. I think a lot of VCs have learned from that. I think a lot of VC reputations who have done this in the past have been tarnished.
Yes.
Because they've removed CEOs. And so I would say in general, it is a very rare event in which that happens. And typically when it does happen, it's typically like something ethical.
Correct.
Or morally corrupt with the person.
Yeah.
As opposed to just a business decision when it has to do with the founder and CEO.
Accenting especially on the founder CEO, to Nolan's point, like before the macro change, right? When 2015, 2016, I mean, when the money was like crazy out there, these VCs were, it was a founder's market, right? And these VCs were very careful not to have tarnished reputations. They wanted to be friends of founders, and give a lot of leeway and a lot of room. And so that was a trend. Now with the macro, I don't know, but it is very rare. And I agree as a last resort. Look at us agreeing.
Yeah, this is awesome. Can we all just get along? I hate to paint in broad strokes here, but in your experience, do you think founder CEOs are more successful in galvanizing a company, whether they lack some of the requisite, like maybe soft skills that you would get in a professional CEO of getting the company to I guess higher ground?
Everything's contextual. So, I've worked for 2 generational founder CEOs. And so my bias is going to be like, they're the best. But that said, Frank Slootman at Snowflake can prove the exact counter to that, which is he was hired in post idea, post product, and like, hey, go now scale this thing. And so both things can be true. It just really depends on who the CEO is. But let's also be clear, CEOs are not imperfect people, regardless if they're founders. And so I think the biggest thing is surrounding that CEO with complementary pieces, and then also getting them like advisors and coaches to help them up level and scale, just as you would anyone else in the organization.
That was good. I feel like the whole professional CEO versus founder CEO argument is a bit biased at times because there's a lot of survivorship bias in that. You don't talk about the founder CEOs, which there are many, who didn't make it to the next chapter.
Well, the majority of companies
the vast
fail.
majority, I guess, 90% of them that we don't talk about. So there is that. When it comes to a CEO exiting, that's at the board's doing, because their job is mainly to hire and fire the CEO. And Kelli, you'd mentioned earlier about being founder friendly. In the Valley, is that looked upon poorly if a CEO gets fired? Like, does that make that VC look like they're, I don't know, don't take money from them? Is it a scarlet letter to some?
I think it depends. I was referencing earlier on, like, again, 2015, it kind of did, right? Like, founders did not want to be controlled, right? And some of these VCs, they had reputations of having a very strong hand and kind of, prescribing certain things or being too, and I think I saw it swing the other way a bit, where it was very founder friendly because you didn't want to have a reputation of being like that. It's kind of like a back channel. Don't work with them. They're right. And that was a thing.
You just have to look at history though, CJ. So like this used to happen all the time in the 90s and early 2000s. And then, people took a step back and looked at the data, and the data was like, oof, we replaced the founder. We thought this company was going to go up and to the right, and they flatlined or died or didn't have the ideal outcome that they wanted. But then what you saw in the 2010s is what Kelly's referring to, especially at the top tier companies. Founders got smart and didn't put their livelihoods and jobs into the hands of the board. They actually removed it by having super voting shares.
Correct.
And so the board couldn't really remove them.
Multiple votes.
And we're only a couple of days, post Sam being departed at OpenAI. So whatever this comes out, there may be more information. But, one of the best takes I saw on Twitter was like, this is why you saw so many founders negotiate super voting shares. So the board couldn't do this to them.
I saw that tweet too. It was like Evan Spiegel and Mark Zuckerberg's super voting shares looking pretty good right now.
Exactly.
Okay, the last one I wanted to hit on. So we started the call with me asking for advice. I'm asking for advice again in a different vein. So if I am in this game long enough, inevitably I could be the one who's getting fired. If I don't want to be left in the lurch and I'm getting on the phone with someone like either of you, how should I go through that call?
Yeah, look, I think the goal is the conversation, right? It's referencing the blood, sweat, and the tears that you gave to that company and that founder. It's asking to be treated fairly. It's asking to be a part of the messaging plan and to help drive that plan and to have a reasonable bridge to the next opportunity. And listen, founders don't want a lot of drama and turbulence. Frankly, they're not that great at this stuff. They don't want to spend their time on it. They're uncomfortable with it. It's like, ugh. So the easier you can make it on them and work with them, the better.
I would view it as a series of conversations. And so first conversation is you're getting news that you're being departed. I think it's really important to act professionally, to be as non-emotional as you possibly can, and then to ask to collect your thoughts and then to have a separate conversation. Then you go away, you break some glass against the wall, get all of your emotion out, and then talk to friends and start getting advice. And typically what that advice is going to be is like, hey, what really matters to you? And you have to do some deep reflection on that. For some people, the comms plan really matters. I've actually come around on this. I used to believe I did not love execs designing their own comms plan for terminations. And I was totally wrong about that. And the reason why is because for some people, their ego is the number one thing they're optimizing for. And if you could just solve for that by letting them design it and then you reviewing it, great. Like, who gives a shit if they say that they're leaving on their own accord? It doesn't matter to business operations. And ultimately, I found like people always find out anyways. As it relates to comp, it's very similar to the advice that I give when somebody's negotiating an offer, which is, you want to hear what the company has to say first. So let them go first versus you being the person that anchors. And then using that as the starting point to then try and negotiate up to ensure that you're doing what's right for yourself and also just protecting yourself. And again, it really does, you should be designing around what you're optimizing for, understanding you're not going to be able to pull all the levers you want.
Two ads I would have there is yes on asking for multiple conversations. And with that, like asking for this to be between like confidential until you've worked out your negotiation plan, your package, and the comms plan. Because once the fire goes out and everyone knows that CJ is going and you have no plan or no, it kind of can backfire. I could not agree more on the messaging. That has like been my number one thing that people have asked for is controlling that narrative. It is Pareto chart, the most important for people.
Isn't that crazy that that's like the same Kelly? I've noticed the same thing is like people care more about that than they do about severance.
Well, it's like we started this conversation. They got to go to the next company. There's going to be referrals, back channels. There's an email out. They got fired. That's not really helpful. Even if that doesn't go anywhere, it's in their mind from a confidence perspective. Now, on the flip side, and I get this, I empathize. I've had CEOs that are like, fuck that. I don't want people thinking executives are walking out of here and like we're losing people. This is a performance issue or this was a violation, and I want the company to know that. I want them to know we made a hard decision. So I have run up against that, which I understand.
I'm like going through my mind now, all these Slack goodbyes that I've seen, not knowing that it was the exact word. I didn't know that was a lever in the toolkit. I never knew people were asking for that. And you're saying it's the most common one.
Let me see if I get the bullseye. The common one is personal time with family.
Yes, it's always that. And if it's or health issues, but usually, yeah, it's personal time with family.
Yeah, all that shit's orchestrated. Sorry to pop the bubble of not knowing.
That's wild.
Nolan has
everyone
templates.
finds out. I'm like the one guy who's like, I didn't know that was going on behind the scenes.
An iceberg has a below the water part.
Ooh, I think that was a good one to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for making me smarter. And this was a juicy one. I think people are going to like this.
Awesome.
Thanks for the time, CJ.
Thanks, CJ.
Thanks. Roll the credits, producer Natalie. Run the Numbers is part of the Turpentine Podcast Network. It is produced by Natalie Torren and edited by Justin Golden. Album artwork by Some AI Thing. Yelling and intro by Fat Joe. If you made it this far, please give us 5 stars. I really need this.